everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of the musical journey that we're on. The ongoing search in regions hither and yon for some of the best and finest tunes and tunage that we're capable of in these here parts. I'm Matt Stranick, with you as always, Dan Hayward. And collectively, we're bringing you today New Brunswick, tomorrow the world. Now with some limited edition merch.
Yes.
We got merch.
We've got the merch.
We do.
I'm waiting for my copy to come in the mail.
It is. It's on the way. I wasn't gonna add the tracking and express parcel and whatnot, because that really would have made the whole enterprise even more unreasonably expensive than it turned out to be.
Yeah, but, for sure.
There's we started with 17 of them, started with 20 of them, double-sided T-shirts, and down to 17. So between people who asked for them and kind of me just kind of giving them out to certain people, it's I don't know. We got the web address and we got the hashtag on the back.
Ooh,
so
branding.
Just in time for the summer T-shirt season,
Exactly.
And so hence, being charged by the T-shirt company for 40 shirts as opposed to 20, you see, because it's based on the graphic layout. But again, this to me is a hobby to end all the hobbies, quite frankly. But so just a little shameless plug there, some shameless self-promotion. And if you're actually interested, anybody out there in internet land who somehow isn't on our, respective, individual social media thingies, I think we're pretty easily found. If you can track this podcast down, you can track us down. And if I get even 2 or 3 people asking me about these shirts that haven't already done so, it wouldn't take much for me to do up another run of them. This is free promotional merchandise. This is like a virtual T-shirt cannon, spraying the internet to whomever is gonna, signify out there in the stands. We're mega-selling concert artists.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. So how's it been going, Dan? And why don't you give us a rundown about what this special theme of this episode is all about? Because you came up with it.
Well, things are going well. It's the last day of a 4-day weekend for me on the day that we're recording here. So It's just been like a nice chill time the past few days, and it was like
happy Easter Monday to those who care or partake.
Or happy half-price chocolate at Sobeys, as I call it. But yes, as far as today's episode is going, the topic that I chose, or the theme that I chose for this week, was short timers and one-album wonders. Just because in the process of putting stuff together for some of our previous episodes, a couple artists have come up that only really had like 1 or 2 like full length, like maybe only had 1 full length release, or like an EP or 2 besides that, if you're lucky, that I thought were pretty good, and for whatever reason I just thought it was they just never ended up doing more than that.
Right.
And for example, like when I was reading Cadence Weapons book in preparation for the episode about our last episode, we talked about music from the prairies. And he mentioned Cannibal Ox's 2002 album, and like their one release from back then, and how it was so influential on them. And it's just like, that's such a great record to me. That was just like, the one time everyone involved was able to get their shit together at the same time to produce this amazing piece of music. Exactly.
Swords, right? That's
for sure. And like, just some of the other, and like one of the other artists that I picked is one of the people involved is somebody that I mentioned on a previous episode as well. But we'll get into that later on. So I just wanted to sort of like talk about some artists that I thought were great that just don't really have a whole lot out there music wise,
Awesome. And, as scenes tend to be fairly incestuous, it's possible that, some of these artists, at least, from my list, have sort of gone on or cross-morphed into other perhaps more regionally or potentially nationally known artists.
Yeah.
And formations and things. I also wonder, Dan, what you thought of the notion of, say, like a singer, stepping outside of a current, musical interest and doing a solo record. Do you suppose is that sort of like a
that definitely fits in?
Okay,
and
good.
I mean, one of my picks, The Uncluded, is kind of the reverse of that, where it's two solo artists putting out an album together as like its own entity.
Nice.
But yeah, I figured the same kind of principle is involved, where like that's something different, something different that somebody worked on under a different, a project under a different name that, yeah, maybe only had like one album or something.
Awesome. Okay, good
for
stuff.
Sure.
I appreciate the context. I appreciate the parameter such that it can include what all I got up here. Handy dandy. Long gestating notes. Gestating right here. So why don't we go with your first pick, Dan? Is it the Oxen thingy that you just mentioned?
I might as well just go about Cannibal. I might as well talk about Cannibal Ox first.
Yeah, sure.
Which they're a hip hop group. They were the first artists to were one of the first artists to put out a release on Definitive Jux Records, which was a big force in independent hip hop in the early 2000s. A$AP Rock, who I talked about on a previous episode, who's one of the folks involved in one of the other projects I'm going to talk about later on as well. They released a bunch of his albums. It's the brainchild of Jamie Moline, aka LP, who you might know now as half of
Run the Jewels.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, dope.
Who at this point was just starting to work on his own music after being part of a group in the mid and late 90s called Company Flow, who really, they would qualify for this list as well. Like technically they have two full lengths, but one of them is just an instrumental album.
Okay.
And yeah, anyways.
I like that. The hip hop instrumental record doesn't really.
And I mean that's LP, that's one of the things that LP was working on a lot at this time. He even did a couple years later. He collaborated with Matthew Shipp and William Parker and a few other kind of like New York jazz folks.
Okay.
On an album where, because his father was a jazz pianist in the 70s, Harry Keys. But anyways,
Harry
so Cannibal Ox.
Sorry, man. Like,
I know. Exactly.
That's a porn actor name.
Anyways.
General casting. Anyway.
So Cannibal Ox was the brainchild of when LP met a couple of sort of solo rappers in New York, Vast Air and Vortal Mega.
Okay.
And they were both kind of like, guys that were sort of working on their own stuff, but not really getting things together on their own. And he basically invited them to move into his house, and he fed them beats for a winter. And just, they lived in his spare room and just made music whenever they had the chance. And they created one album that came out in 2002, The Cold Vein. That's just like this perfect, like, just dark, spacey, like, it's like New York, it's like, classic New York hip hop meets Blade Runner almost type soundtrack, where like
Frosty.
Vortal Mega was like a very like Vortal Mega is more, and it's he's got basically two artists taking like every good idea they've had over the previous however many years and putting it in one record, being fed beats by like one of the greatest, someone who's like one of the best hip hop producers of the past 20 years, in my opinion, or 20 to 30 years.
And so the producer then was on the way up, or is that like
he was definitely on the way up. Okay. And the other, these other two were folks that sort of he had invited to work with him, and I mean they've both sort of done their own solo stuff since, and like they've never really able to recapture that first album. Like they didn't really do any other releases. I think they maybe had another single or so after The Cold Vein came out. And then kind of the two vocalists started working on their own solo stuff. Vortal Mega's had a lot of mental health issues as well, and that's kind of been an impediment on working on his own music. There's actually a song on one of LP's solo records called Tasmanian Pain Coaster. That's about the first conversation they'd had in years after making that album, after sort of they ended their musical partnership, and just how fucking awkward and like just how real it got all of us, out of nowhere. So, and later on, eventually, like the two vocalists got together again, like in probably the late 2000 teens. Like Vastair and Vortal Mega have made some music together since, but it's never really been the same, and it wasn't with LP. Like they just didn't have that structure to work around.
Right.
And it wasn't like, hey, we're taking these years and years of all of our best ideas and putting them into this one great album. And then just like, where do you go from? It's like, people talk about the curse of like the second season of a TV show or like your second album. Just the second anything is always like, it's like, oh, you put everything you had into making this statement, and now you have to make another one.
It takes all your life to write your first novel. Is sort
exactly
of, the concept there, and then after that, it's a different ball game altogether.
Mm-hmm. So. And like Vastair and Vortal Mega's solo work is definitely worth checking out as well. And like I said, LP is one of my favorite hip hop artists of the past couple of decades.
Cool.
Easy, like past like, well, I guess he's been going since the mid '90s, so almost 30 years now. So that was Cannibal Ox is my first pick, and The Cold Vein is their album to check out.
Well, that's fantastic.
It's on all the streaming services and stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. No. Again, just given Mr. the other non-killer Mike.
Yes, guy. The other guy, the little guy with the mustache.
Yeah. Little mustachio man that isn't Super Mario. Given his rise, meteoric, as it were. It's definitely likely to be on the iTunes and whatever else, right? So.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And he's an artist I'll talk about. I'll find a reason to talk about some other time. Cause that's somebody that's like, they hit fame in their 30s, which I don't think happens that often. Well, but anyways,
in the music biz,
exactly.
You're like creeping up on being, a skull.
Yeah. And that was.
But if you're like, a painter or a writer, then,
exactly.
You're still in you're still pubescent almost at that age. So.
Oh, for sure. And that's the thing. Like, it's like different art forms. I feel like, they can be at their finest when people are at different ages,
and anybody, who through their career or their art or both can sort of manifest as defying convention of some variety is something I think that personally each of us and on this show I think would tend to gravitate towards. So
exactly.
No, man, that's sick. Well, I'm going to go with something that's a very conventional thing, which it was like out of the ones that I thought of, it's the most obvious for me, but I thought of it last when I was sort of just sketching it out. And Operation Ivy,
Of course.
I had to go back and just double check to see if that was one of the ones that you mentioned, just because that's how obvious it was. And yet, nevertheless, if you're thinking about, Lookout Records, if you're thinking about, 80s Bay Area thing, which, you can, and all the attendant blame for, punk music in the 90s that you can lay at the feet of Lookout Records. I don't even think besides Sam I Am's first disc, their first 7-inch, and besides the Op Ivy record, I can't actually think of any Lookout Records artists.
Oh, you
could give me some right now if you want to.
Well, Green Day.
Oh, Scheitza.
The first couple of Green Day albums.
Really? Okay,
yeah.
was on Lookout. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of. That label is just such a huge part of things. Actually, yeah, one of the other bands that was on my list, Behead the Prophet. One of those folks was in an older Lookout band, Sweet Baby. I'm trying to think Blatt's the Blatt's Filth Split LP is a favorite Lookout record of mine that's been released later on. That's kind of like basically like everybody that worked at the Gilman Street Project, their bands at a certain time. That's like a perfect snapshot of like a certain gritty side of the Bay Area scene. That was I think originally released on
was Crimpshire
Crimpshire were on there as well. Actually, okay. Every once in a while, Larry Livermore, who founded Lookout Records, pops up in my People You May Know on Facebook. Who like he's got to be in his like, I think he's got to at least be in his late 60s now, like early. He was one of those guys that came. Like he was one of those folks like Tim Yohannan that founded Maximum Rock and Roll, who came out of like the MC5 scene and then moved to San Francisco, and then everybody else caught up with them in the 80s, like in the 70s and 80s, like because they're like that much older, you know, like
elder statesmen among the Gen
exactly.
Cohort.
But like Lookout, I mean, like Screeching Weasel as well. Like there's just a certain level of pop, like a certain level of the pop punk scene for a certain period of time. Lookout was definitely the label. But yeah, Operation Ivy are usually the band that was everyone's introduction to that label.
Yeah, it's like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And now, just as you mentioned, like Screeching Weasel, and I don't know if you were going to say the Queers, are on there as well or whatnot.
Yeah.
But
the Queers are actually playing here in Halifax in a couple months.
Fantastic. I'm glad, like bands at
still
that
around
level, still like, whether, they have day jobs or not that they've sustained. I just think it's fantastic that somehow they managed to just keep the spark alive long enough to, keep it going. So, I mean, besides the fact that that's just, that's kind of the, that ska punk thing that, it's like it's okay to have fun, you don't have to be just a like angry little nihilist with your punk music. It's what's cool about it, apart from the fact that I turned into, I guess inadvertently, a pretty big Rancid fan. From that, I don't know if you heard about this, but Jesse Michaels, the singer, as well
is it
as
Bad Optics?
Bad Optics, yeah.
Yes, I am familiar.
So this is a project by the Rancid guy who is is it Lars? It's not Lars.
It's Tim Armstrong.
Tim Armstrong. Thank you. I just you're gesticulating there a little bit too much. But with Jesse Michaels, the singer, right? So they're back together with two, guys that they're both friends with, and Bad Optics. They've got at least a couple of songs out now that are coming out in advance of a full-length album. Don't know if they're touring behind it this summer or not, but it's pretty easily found on your social media stuff. And I haven't gone super deep onto the new items yet, but it's just like cool. This is I'm glad this exists. So, and I saw on the Hard Times page, a little a meme to the effect of the skanking man is like unhappy, that he wasn't invited for the Off Ivy reunion. So, anyway, hugely influential, hugely danceable, hugely, and for like a band of like people who are like maybe 18 or 19 years old.
Oh yeah,
and only together, for like 2 years from start to finish in their original run. It's just like the music sounds, apart from just sounding really like fun and spontaneous, it sounds incredibly accomplished. Like you can just they're just
very talented musicians. That's the thing.
And just and that's where the musical art form. It's like you go from taking maybe a lesson or something with your parents when you're 6 or 7 years old. By the time you're 15, you've been doing your own thing like that for probably close to a decade.
Yeah.
By the time you're 25, you're either a veteran or burned out or both, right? So,
oh yeah, for sure.
It just kind of, and in their moment with that, it sort of I think captures what a lot of us may have felt, at similar ages, right?
Yeah.
So again, I've been listening to just on the Apple device quite a lot of Op Ivy lately, and for sure I'll be checking out for that Optics. And yeah, man, thanks for the expanded backgrounder on Lookout Records. That's
for sure. So, no problem.
Good stuff, man. So what do you got on your next one?
Oh, I just had one more
please.
quick comment about or a couple quick comments about Op Ivy.
Sure.
Their drummer, I can't remember their drummer's name for the life of me, but he's released a bunch of music under the name. He released a bunch of music afterwards under the name Schlong.
Oh.
That was just kind of like weird. It was kind of like just weird, jokey, kind of almost jazzy punk stuff. Like he did a punk cover, like an album of punk covers of the West Side Story soundtrack. With the lyrics slightly altered to be about like a punk in a skin instead of tensions on the low, tensions in New York in the 1950s. So he kind of was just off on his own weird, kind of more almost closer to like Mexican Power Authority or like those kind of like weird bands, like, and while the rest of the guys kept flying the ska flag. And anyways, I figured this was a good time to talk about one of my other picks who occupy a similar space to Operation Ivy, but in a slightly different subgenre of punk, which is Gorilla Biscuits. Who
sounds familiar to me.
They existed from 1986 to 1989. They got together when the members of the band were still in high school. I know when they first started out, their singer Siv apparently was so self-conscious he couldn't even look at the crowd, and he would face the audience. But they were like, they came up around that era of the New York scene that was picking up after like, say, like Agnostic Front and the Cro-Mags and those sorts of bands, where it was bands like Youth of Today and Bold were starting to play a lot, and like Gorilla Biscuits were contemporaries of them, but their philosophy was more like, hey, if we're going to play music, we should be good at our instruments.
Oh, and that's a novel concept.
Not only were they, into a lot of like the faster, angrier stuff that like their contemporaries listened to, but they were really into like 7 Seconds and the Descendants and bands like that. And they were like of that whole like quote unquote 88 youth crew kind of sound. They were the band that really brought a lot of like melody and like actual songwriting to the table in a lot of cases. And,
awesome,
they released a demo and then a 7-inch on Revelation Records and then one full-length album, Start Today, in 1989. By 1990, they'd broken up. Their drummer ended up having quite a successful career in advertising afterwards.
Okay.
Their singer quit music for a decade and became like a pretty like reputable tattoo artist around New York. And then sort of the main guy to keep going for the band was their guitarist Walter Schriefels, who went on afterwards to play in a band called Quicksand, who had a few albums in the 90s, and they're actually back together and touring now and releasing music again. And then a couple other projects like Rival Schools, and he's been actively making music since that time, but this was like his high school project where he was first sort of like, playing around in a familiar genre, but, like when you listen to when you think about Gorilla Biscuits, probably the two songs, their two big hits, quote unquote, are, of course I blank on the first one, but of the two, Start Today, the title track on their album, is probably one of their most popular songs.
Awesome.
And it's like a mid-tempo rocker that sounds more like a Descendants song, and there's a fucking harmonica solo in the middle. And it's great. And they're like, they would be this is a band that played like CBGB's matinees in late New York, where it's just like the toughest of the tough hardcore guys.
Of course.
And, they were the band that, brought a little pop to the table with it. Mostly through Walter's influence, I think. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Bucket Truck from the East Coast.
Definitely.
Well, in the around like, I think it must have been like 2000. Well, I think it was like 2006 or so. They were working on an album and brought Walter from Gorilla Biscuits and Quicksand in to produce it.
Neat.
And he ended up playing a bunch of solo shows around Halifax, just acoustic.
Oh,
like straight up just like
cool.
guitar and like harmonica holder style. And he covered Start Today as like, he played Start Today as part of his set in with like all these other solo songs and like songs of different bands of his over the years. And he'd do the little harmonica solo using the little rack and everything. And it was pretty, it's like, it looked like Joel, he looked like Joel Plaskett on stage, but playing these like new old acoustic versions of like old New York hardcore songs. And it was pretty great.
Well, you kind of, if you're talking like early aughts, then I mean, you're really kind of at least maybe a half a decade or even a full decade ahead of a lot of these, musicians who are growing into that. Like I got that Kevin Seconds record, a solo record, which is largely an acoustic endeavor, or like Chuck Reagan and Dave House and all these sort of early aughts punk guys who would like go on tour and do like the revival tour. It's like the difference between punk music and Woody Guthrie is just so narrow. It's cool. That sounds awesome, man. What an opportunity that would have been to see them to see that guy at like the Marquee or whatever, right? That would have been awesome.
Yeah, no, it was he played a show I think at the Seahorse, and then he played the Pavilion, which is like the all ages venue.
Awesome.
The crappy metal hardcore band that I was singing for at the time got to open for him at that show. It was quite it was fun. But anyways, the other song that I blanked on that's like their other popular song, New Direction.
Okay.
That's kind of their like their reaction to bands like Fugazi and that coming out, where they were just kind of like, hey, we liked your old records more, basically. But I find it funny that in 1989 they released, that was like one of their popular songs, is where one of the big lines is that, is saying that they're tired of coded messages and slowed down songs. And then within 12 months, Walter's in Quicksand, who were like a really great kind of like slower melodic like alt rock band almost, playing more sort of abstract lyrics that could be considered more like coded messages in slowed down songs. But still, I think it's a great line. I think that but still it's and again, they're one of those bands that's like like Op Ivy, that like when you first start getting your feet wet in different sort of subgenres, I guess you could say, of punk rock, like usually these are the bands that you first kind of first grab you. So it is great, that's one of the great reasons they exist. And even if they weren't around for that long, like in both cases, it's folks that are like this is like their high school project or their post high school project before they kind of figure out more of where they're at.
Well, I mean, hooray for musicians who go on to awesome day jobs, like, tattoo artist or advertising or whatever your shtick is, and if music can be a part of that on the way up, it's fantastic. And if you can keep it going, I mean, that's wonderful too, right? It's, whatever you can do to stay relevant and whatever you can do that motivates you personally. It's awesome that it's still out there to be found, right? So I learned the Sammy Siegler advertising career factoid from a great podcast that isn't around anymore, but went for a couple of years, called Killed by Desk. That was it was very nice. It was nice. Basically they would track down people that played in like punk and hardcore bands when they were younger. And talk to them about what their day job is now. That's fantastic.
And it was like, you could get like a dentist or like a chef or like a lot of teachers. And
a lot of librarians too.
A couple of librarians too, but whole lot of teachers, various, you learn about all different levels of the education system. But it is just, it was kind of a pretty cool, like almost like Studs Terkel-y kind of thing. Anyways, what was your next pick, Matt?
So I think I've got a few of them, but I guess the next one that sort of jumps out do you remember from Ottawa? This is an offshoot of Shotmaker.
Oh yes.
Slow Parker.
Oh yeah. I remember them.
Okay, so Shotmaker is obviously a fucking legend, and they, I wouldn't want to pigeonhole them just onto the show because they had, at least two major significant, releases and everything else. And for particularly Canadian kids who were like into hardcore in the 90s, I mean, that they're just so fucking like they stand out as fucking icons as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But having said that, the drummer / singer guy whose name I'm going to fail on, he's actually remained in Ottawa, and he's got, from what I can tell, a pretty wide and diverse range of musical projects that he's been kind of intermittently putting out on Bandcamp and things like that. But among, the immediate post Shotmaker kind of stuff that he was releasing or part of, there's like bands like 30 Second Motion Picture.
Yeah.
I listened to them when I was living in Montreal with Gumby's brother Ben and a few other people. That was on the turntable. But I saw Slow Parker at the Elks Club in Fredericton, and the descriptions of it on Discogs and whatnot are like they call it post rock. And I get that because it's almost entirely instrumental, highly like just the percussion is kind of leading the melody, and the melody is just really like laid back jazz chords, polyrhythmical drumming, polyrhythmical kind of bass underneath it, and the record Slow Parker's Music Station. It sounds like it's something that you would want to stream, just as like almost comfortable yet slightly disconcerting background music. And I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting when I went to see him at the Elks Club, but I was like one of like only 3 people who were like dancing to it. I was like doing just my like nerdy, sideways dance, at the front. It was really, and then I tried to talk to the guy after about Shotmaker, and he just his eyes just. I was like, but it was really good. It was really good, and this is awesome too. And Shotmaker, and he just like was not prepared to engage on it that day, which I completely get. So I found the full release just as a YouTube clip, which I'm going to put in the show notes. And I appreciated having the opportunity to revisit that on this show because I hadn't actually thought about. Do you follow the Shotmaker archive? I think you do, right, on Instagram?
Yeah, I do. And they're one of those bands that just like they were just. I don't know. I hate to. I feel like I use the term iconic a lot to describe certain kinds of bands, but they're just like they were like the band, and especially the Canadian band for like a certain era.
Right. It's like they were on the Ebullition Records comp. They were
exactly like they were like that band, and the fact that they were from like this little shit town in Ontario, like, or just like a very small community in Ontario that was not like a cool, and then like moved to Ottawa, I guess. Like they were from like I can't remember where it was, but
lots of small shit towns.
Exactly, it was like some town. Like Ottawa was like a step up, like in terms of like sort of location wise, like size of location wise. Like they were from like Milton or like one of those little places. But if I remember correctly, I think Slow Parker might have played Fredericton one other time in like. One of those venues on like the UMB campus with like a really one of those like we've got our excellent acoustic kind of little like theater, like where they would have like choral stuff or something. Because I'm pretty sure I remember seeing them in like 283
or like Gallery Connection or something.
Or like one of those oh god, Gallery Connections. Like one of those kind of seeing them at like one of those kind of venues in Fredericton as well. And they were definitely like
would have been a good fit with 283. I gotta say. Clearly. So, anyway, man, that's my number 2. Not that they have any great hierarchy or anything, except maybe going from maybe more known to less known. So you got a third one probably. What are you looking at?
I guess. Well, I might as well go with one that's a little more obscure, I guess, from that kind of like ebullition adjacent scene. And I mean, that's one thing I realized is like with like punk rock, especially when you get a lot of people that are like, only really engaging with the genre at certain times in their lives. It might only be like a 2 or 3 year window where they might want to like work in a certain genre. So you get a lot of artists that only have like one album. So it was like really hard for me to narrow some down. But I was thinking of one band that I actually got to see. I remember seeing live once when I was living on the West Coast in the late 90s, and who actually came up in discussion with. I was in like it sounds totally dorky. I was in a voice chat hangout at a Discord server talking about music. Like me and a bunch of dorky. Yes, it's like this music. It's like basically it was a music chat that was like me, 4 like hardcore dudes from Milwaukee, like a postal worker from Maine, and an a manga translator from Tokyo. Or who lives in Tokyo but is from like New York or something. All just hanging out while one guy was like playing records. And like people were just like, hanging out, talk. And anyways, one of the guys put on a record that was like a split 7-inch between The Thrones, which is Joe Preston from the Melvin solo project, and a band from Olympia, Washington called Behead the Prophet, No Lord Shall Live.
That's mouthful.
It is a mouthful. A lot of the time, like for their one, like for most of their records, it's Behead the Prophet NLSL. And they took their name from a Deicide song, even though it's in my notes I described them as having like the name of a metal band, the style of like like a fashionable new wave band, because they usually wear like all white suits on stage. With like sped up, almost like garage rock guitar riffs, and like really off kilter, like polyrhythmic, like bass and drums, and like this kind of like almost like scratchy, gremlin-y vocals, and then over top of it all, a 65-year-old man playing a violin through a ton of effects pedals, standing on a chair behind them, like trying not to get knocked over by the crowd. Wow. And it's just like, they had this. Yeah, like seeing them live was just so intense because of that. Just with this, like, it was like, it was like your
sounds
cool
like a real freak scene.
Fashion, exactly. And like, they had one album on K Records, called "I Am That Great and Fiery Force," and then like a couple of 7-inches besides that. And they're one of those bands that they were just a little too weird, a little too early. For the scene, and like all of the members of the band were gay at a time when you didn't really run into that a lot, especially in like the hardcore scene, and they were playing like intense, loud, crazy music. And
Mr. New set it precedent for gay hardcore,
for sure. And
point well taken.
Like I remember being at a show in Buffalo, New York in the late 90s, and having to help friends of mine get out of a club because they covered a song by a band whose singer was gay. And like all of these like just like super exactly like all of these, it was one of these shows that was just like packed wall to wall with just like meathead dudes in like basketball jerseys, like one of those kind of shows. Right. And then I ended up having to escort my friends. New York hardcore, like that kind of stuff. But anyways, like that's the era of the scene that Behead the Prophet were playing in. And like I was able to find a rip of their album on YouTube, but I can't find it. It's not on any streaming services. And fun fact, when you search for them on YouTube, it will not auto-populate your search results. Once you get to put the BEHE, then it's just like, we're not showing you anything else.
It's like when I tried.
We know what's been on the internet. But
many have tried before this search.
Exactly. So it's like they have an unfortunately like hard to search name on the internet. But just great. Like all their songs are probably under 2 minutes long, and just like awesome, kind of like fast, weird art rock and roll, like like Velvet Underground and the Bad Brains mashed together almost. Like, and yeah,
You're
like
doing
just
a hell of a job of selling it, man.
the weird little, and yeah, just having like a weird little old man playing violin over top of it all. And when I lived in Victoria, my roommate ran a noise label, or at one point, and he was putting out a cassette for this band called Noggin. That was the other project of Michael, the violinist from Behead the Prophet.
Oh.
And he would call our house back in the era when, you had a landline. Yeah. And it was just like somebody's grandpa calling. And it's like, hello, is Eric there? And, checking out of the state of the release. And it's like, oh no, that's the violinist from that gay hardcore band from Olympia. He's just checking in on his noise albums. And the one time I got to see them when I lived in Portland, they actually had the other guy that their violinist put out noise albums with, just doing like additional sounds over top of the band while they were playing. And it was pretty great. Like, it just was like, just a wall of like discord almost. And like something that just, seemed either before its time or just never really found its time. And like, a couple of the band, like their guitarist and bassist Dave from Beyond the Grave and Quiddy, both ended up starting a band with some of the folks from the band Carp afterwards, called Tight Bros from way back when. That ended up having they were more of like a straight ahead garage rock band, and like had a few records out, and they made a little more of a name for themselves, and coincidentally had one of my favorite like rock band names ever in Tight Bros from way back when. But like that was kind of more their, maybe didn't reach the heights of Rancid, but that was kind of their Rancid almost. And then I think their singer ended up going on to become a chef, and leaving, is like quite
like
well
Greg Norton from Husker Du.
Exactly. He followed the Greg Norton route and is like big in like the culinary scene in the Pacific Northwest and stuff. I feel like he doesn't go by the last name Plague anymore, because that might not really fit in.
Well,
with,
a lot of these artists now, that's like, you had your whole pseudonymous.
Exactly.
The internet wasn't there to just like tag you, like, to your DNA from images and stuff. So sounds wicked, man.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to checking them out.
Yeah, I'll put the link to their full album's like less than 20 minutes long too. So, but yeah, I'll put the link. That'll be in the notes. Is the link to their full length. Anyways, what was your next pick, Matt?
Yeah, well, I guess, like, since we're kind of getting, within the last 15 minutes here, I got a few that I think I'd probably just, save for the show notes. But I guess the one that I would want to speak to the most would just be Meditation, which I referred to earlier, from Montreal. Members of St. Catherine's, largely, plus Dickie Hammond from Leatherface. Which made Dickie, and that was the last recording that Dickie participated in before his death. Actually, he died of pretty significant alcoholism before the age of 45, before the age of 50, anyway. So it's just it was such a cool thing, when I even heard that it existed, and I wasn't even aware of it until pretty well after the fact. I've always, followed Leatherface really closely since I became aware of them, when I was 19 or 20, thanks to Gumby's brother Ben. Gumby, GBB, I think that. Yeah. And, just having, an affinity for anything that sounds like Leatherface, even really, that whole Husker Du and Motorhead, paradigm, which they, lived up to. And, that's a bit of a cliche that I've heard about Leatherface, but it's actually, I think, pretty complimentary, and it's one that is fairly accurate. Now, Leatherface is a band that two people, have died. One of the long-serving bassists, committed suicide. He died by gun at a certain point, and then Dickie, has passed away. So, at this point, Frankie's like really the only person remaining out of the original cohort. And, I think the drummer, is like a chef or something in Sunderland. But in terms of active musicians or whatnot, and they just, I guess, developed a friendship or an affinity with the dudes from St. Catharines. And, they combined to put out really an amazing record, Warm Places. It's put out on Little Rocket, I want to say the name of the record label. It's the drummer in the sort of the last era of Leatherface, this younger guy playing the drums. He started a record label of sorts in Sunderland. And it came out on that, and it's just beautiful. Like, it's just really thoughtful, mid-tempo, never cliche. Like it's hard to say, exactly what Dickie's guitar playing sounded like, except that it sounded completely like its own thing. If you ever listen to Mush, if you ever listen to, the Fill Your Boots album, I mean. It's just there's so many great, soaring, wide open moments with the guitar, and it's just really interesting to hear that transposed, or played over with, these Montreal guys who had gotten pretty tight, because this came out in like 2015 or something. It wasn't even that long ago. It was literally like, and then the next year he passed away, kind of thing. They toured the UK. With another guitar player, just, to sort of pay tribute, as it were, to their, past member. And anyways, man, in terms of like one-off kind of side projects or whatever, I mean, that really was pretty high in the list for me, I got to say. And, it's definitely, if you're a fan of anything like that kind of music, it's worth it. It's out on vinyl. They got a Bandcamp that I think is still active. So totally worth checking out, man.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to quickly run, give brief synopses of the two, and I'll put more so in the notes, which is one is another one of these one-off side project sort of situations, which is The Uncluded, which is a collaboration between Aesop Rock and Kimya Dawson, who's formerly of the Moldy Peaches and who'd also done, has done quite a bit of her own solo work as well. And about 10 years ago, they came together and made this really amazing kind of like sometimes sad, sometimes pretty like mix of like folk and hip hop, mostly talking about grief and grieving and like recovery from various sort of issues. And it's just like this really cool little, it's like, when you get two flavors that you don't think would fit entirely like work together, and they work together perfectly, where a lot of Kimya Dawson's music is very just like direct, I guess you could say, and Aesop Rock uses a lot of kind of like abstract imagery in his lyrics and kind of
cerebral hip hop artist, man.
It's like it's almost like he's
dope,
exactly. And it's like she's sort of putting this direct, blunt force into it, and he's almost just kind of like dancing around the sidelines with his collaboration points. And like they'd worked together a couple other times, like on her album, on a couple of her albums, a couple of his albums, but this is the first time they've really come together. And it's like their album Hokey Fright is definitely worth checking out. It's on all the streaming services. And also, my last pick was another artist from the Pacific Northwest, a band called the Exploding Hearts, who are just kind of one of those sad little rock and roll stories where, they started in the, around the turn of the millennium, I guess you could say. Put out one album called Guitar Romantic on Dirt Nap Records. They're like sort of a poppy melodic punk band from Portland, Oregon. They basically said like what the Strokes wish they sounded like.
I'll forgive you.
Like, that's the best way I can describe
it. For mentioning the Strokes on this show.
Yeah, that's they sound like what certain music critics at the time who really wished the Strokes sounded a certain way wish they actually, sort of. It's like the way people describe the Strokes this is what these guys actually sounded like.
Nice.
Just like you could play their album Guitar Romantic and say like this band played. It was they used to play Max's Kansas City in 1978. I'd be like, sure.
Fits right.
It's like this perfect, just like distillation of a particular sound. But unfortunately, on the way home from some gigs in San Francisco in July 2003, they got into an accident in their van, and 3 of the 4 members of the band passed away.
Oh.
So yeah, and 3. And on the 20, sort of in anticipation of the 20th anniversary of all that, Third Man Records is re-releasing Guitar Romantic.
Cool.
It's definitely worth checking out soon. But it's
thank you, Jack White.
Yeah,
we'll say that.
exactly.
Yeah,
so that was the last pick that I had for it was the Exploding Hearts, which they were sort of only around for a short time for a different reason, but their album's fucking great.
Wow.
If you get a chance to listen, check it out.
I'm sufficiently intrigued, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's
well, I guess I'll just throw in a couple of bullets here then, for my remaining list. Just really quickly, I'm just gonna give a shout out to the Fredericton artist Aldernaut, because they it's like there was the demo tape, which is a friggin' it's an object of almost religious significance in Fredericton, but there's the Barn Overload album.
Yeah.
It's also freely available online. So they're one, quote unquote proper LP. That's the one that you're going to find listed on Discogs. And to my ear, I mean, it's like literally the recordings from the demo with nothing done to them on the record. And they got a couple of extra songs sort of thrown on at the end. Right?
I'm pretty sure that is actually what it was, like an Italian label.
Yes, it was.
Released that, and that was, because it was Fredericton in the 90s. If you've got a recording, you might as well just put that recording out.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it stands out as something that like would have gotten that recognition.
Yeah, and it had much further reach than a cassette that they sold locally.
Yeah,
for sure.
Even if it's just like the same, 4-track or 8-track recording, of punks playing together in a room at once. I mean, still, it's on vinyl. It's
a great record.
Country. It is.
Yep.
It's fantastic. So there's that one. I also included Rape Man by Weenie Band. Very unfortunate name. A lot of negative, rightly so, discourse about that. And in fact, Steve, I don't want to say he's apologized for it, but he kind of has. He's like, I was kind of in this, elevated position at the time, and the name of that band is sort of like a bad tattoo now. I wish I could get rid of it, but I can't. But honestly, if you sort of take away that whole aspect of it and you just sort of look at the tunes, I mean, it's just nasty, crunchy bursts of weirdness. Steve Albini freaking out. Tight, drumming, tight bass. And you can see it's sort of it's the last, band that Albini was part of before going into a shellac, which was much more longer running enterprise. And I think still, even today is still going on. So, the notable track from that, it's a cover of some old rock song, Just Got Paid. It's worth the streaming just to hear, just got paid today, got me a pocket full of change. So gonna shout that one out. And the very last one, in my endless dive into Chicago punk from the aughts, discovered the Broadways. Two members of the Lord's Arms, whom I'm just, head over heels with on Man Love lately, that's just kind of their first. It wasn't their first band, but I think it was the first album that got any recognition. They were only around for 2 years. They put out one, proper record, and then another which had the same recordings plus, an EP tacked on, so a comp track. I put up a picture when I got it on my ridiculous Instagram where I document my records, and I actually had people from Chicago saying, I got that, nice. Tattooed on my back, in giant letters. Like, thank you, man. I didn't, it's So for me, it's just kind of a new thing, but it's 20 plus years old at this point, and worth it to check out as well. And Dan, that's all I got on my list, except for maybe a couple of miscellaneous things for the end. Is there anything you wanted to just kind of add as well?
One more. I guess there was one more hip hop album that I wanted to add, which was I think I realized why it was as known as it was to me at the time that I heard of it, which is Main Source's album Breaking Atoms from 1990.
Okay.
And Main Source was sort of a rapper producer named Large Professor. And then I can't remember the names, but he had two DJs that worked with him who were both from Toronto. And therefore, I think their album was considered Canadian content. And I remember there was a certain time around like 89, 90, where their music videos seemed to get played a lot on like Rap City on Much Music. And I mean, they're legitimately a very good, they're sort of contemporaries of like A Tribe Called Quest, an artist like that. And like, Large Professor kind of was part of this, sort of a similar scene. And I guess the most notable, one of the biggest effects that their only album, Breaking Atoms, had on the larger musical scene was that Nas made his very first appearance on a song on the album called Live at the Barbecue. Where it's right there. Nas when he was 18 years old, doing his first recorded his first released verse ever is
Nas is going on tour this fall, opening for Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh wow.
I'm like, they're playing Vancouver, and I'm kicking myself just now for not even having bought the tickets yet. I feel like I can still wait it out a little bit longer, but I saw Wu-Tang's opening, and then it's like, and Nos opening. It's like you almost want to flip the headline a bit, depending on who we are, right?
Nos is very he's put out a lot of music. I think some people his catalog has some highs and lows for some people, but the highs are pretty high. And Large Professor from Main Source actually produced a lot of the a few of the tracks on Nas's debut Illmatic as well. So it's like, they're very much like they're a big kind of a foundational part of that whole scene that maybe didn't get don't get remembered as much because they were more so like the folks who had an artist who was around longer as a guest on their album. They gave them that little leg up, but like at the same time, their video for the song Just Hanging Out, I feel like got played a bunch to the point that like my father would make fun of it when he heard it.
Well, I hope that's going to be included in the notes because
that'll be there forever. That's probably the main one that I can think of as like another artist that they only put out the one album, but it was a big part of a certain time for me.
Cool beans, man.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think that's we've done a pretty full overview of some of this stuff. I don't necessarily get a ton of engagement through the social media or whatnot, but if there's anybody that you think would be worthy in inclusion, you, the listener or viewer or whomever, do tag us or hit us up on the show notes pages or the, wherever you're listening to this, leave a comment, because doing a second episode of this or more, I don't think would be a question, because
I think it would be pretty easy to put together another list of 5 artists that only had like an album.
Yeah, totally. So okay, well, I think probably that's it for me. Dan, you feeling good? So
that's it for me.
Well, again, thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing. Take care, everybody. We appreciate you, and we'll see you again next time.
All right. See you around, folks.